check. Hey. Check. 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 Okay, so dwi just yn neud siŵr ti'n hapus efo beth i weld efo na gwio? Hey, check 1, 2, hey, check 1, 2, siarad, check. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check 1, 2, 1, 2, check 1, 2, hey. Na, okay. Check beth ochr fi, Gwen. Hey. 1, 2, hey. Check 1, 2, check. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Siarad. Okay. Iawn, a dwi am wneud yn y peth efo recording mic, Okay, recording mic, ti'n clywed hwnna? Ti'n clywed rhywbeth?
Wel, noswaith I chi I Neuadd Powys, Brifysgol Bangor. A very warm welcome to you from here at Powys Hall at Bangor University. I'm Jenna Mathias. I'm in the music department, and I'm joined tonight by four composers who are having pieces performed in this evening's concert. We have, beginning on the side there, we have Rhian Samuel, and we have Sarah Leanne Lewis, Hilary Tan, Steph Power, and also joining us on stage is Deborah Keyser from TKEV Records. We're not quite a complete group because Eleanor Alberger was also having a piece performed in this evening's concert. She was planning to be with us here tonight, but unfortunately is unable to. And it's a very special evening, isn't it, Deborah? Because unusually, all of the works that we're going to hear in tonight's concert have been recorded on a brand new TKEV Records CD. Isn't that right? Can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
I can. Yeah, we're very excited about this release, actually. TKEV Records has been going for, well, my colleague at the back of the room, my predecessor, Gwyn L. Williams, set up the label with the team about, 7 years ago, I think, roughly speaking, maybe a little longer. And it's always had the remit of promoting Welsh music within Wales and further afield. And on Friday, this coming Friday, we're releasing Unbroken Threads, which is the release of these 4 works plus the Eleanor Alberger work. Shall I tell you a little bit about the genesis of the project?
Please do.
Mary Hoffman got in touch with me to tell me about these new pieces that have been commissioned. Frill Music Club. I don't know if anyone's here this evening from Frill Music Club. I hope they're either here or watching online, because they did the most wonderful thing. They wanted to both celebrate the Beethoven bicentenary and also, 250, wasn't it? Yes, thank you. And at the same time celebrate Welsh music, Welsh women composers. So they commissioned Rhian, Sarah and Hilary to write new pieces that would respond to Beethoven violin sonatas, which was a really wonderful thing to do, to invest in Welsh composers in that way and the music of the future. So Mary came to me to ask if we would be interested in releasing this disc. And of course we jumped at the chance. And alongside these 3 works, we programmed the Eleanor Alberger, it was something that Mary and Richard had played, and this beautiful piece by Steph as well. So it's a really wonderful collection, a variety of styles, and yes, it's released on Friday, and it's over there, and it's behind me, and it's
Funnily
an object
enough,
of beauty.
we have copies here, just in case. Okay, so that's so exciting, because we love going to concerts, we love listening to music on CD, but here we can have everything in the same place. How about that? How about that? But this idea of Beethoven, and I think it was Rhian, Sarah and Hilary have all been specially commissioned in this wonderful way. Respond to Beethoven when you create a piece of contemporary music. That's a bit of a challenge, isn't it, responding? Yeah, how does one respond to Beethoven's violin sonatas? It's rather difficult. Rhian?
Well, my first thought was, what a strange thing to ask women composers to do. I've spent most of my life trying to get away from Beethoven hero, and here we have Real Music Club asking us. Actually, I think it was Real Music Club's idea. Mary's idea was to get 3 women composers to write. The head of Real Music Club, I think it was his idea that it should be Beethoven. So I was kind of stuck for a while, not really wanting to interrogate Beethoven. Great composer though he is, it really didn't have a lot to do with my own music. But I persevered and did spend a lot of time with the Beethoven sonatas and picked the Spring Sonata as the one I would relate to. And in fact, I did in several ways. I won't go into them because they're in the program. I don't know if the program is available on the web.
It is. We think of everything here at Bangor.
Well, very briefly. I use sonata form for the first movement, which I don't normally use at all. I used a melody in the second movement, which was my response to the beautiful first melody in the first movement of the Spring Sonata. And the last movement is probably more like Bartók than Beethoven. So I'll stop there.
Wow, that sounds very, very exciting. And can I just ask, why the Beethoven Spring Sonata, which I think is number 5, if I'm right thinking, why were you particularly drawn to that one?
Oh, the melody, the
the
tune. Definitely. It's the one you can go away singing. It's beautiful. So, yeah.
I think it's very interesting because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you all three of you found the experience of responding to Beethoven, that sort of creative dialogue had quite different ways of going about it and quite different approaches in many ways. Sarah, if we could talk about your piece, Until the Thread Breaks. That's a quote, isn't it, from Beethoven, the title?
Yeah, so it's a quote from a letter that he wrote to his brothers when he was discovering he was going deaf. So my violin piece responded to the 7th violin sonata, which is the one in C minor. And rather than taking material from it, I was responding to the time period that he was writing it, the loss as a musician of a sense that is so integral to what we do, the loss of hearing and the fear behind that. I responded to that in the way that I wrote the music. There's quite a lot of harmonics in my music, so through the piece, pitches are heard as they're played first, and then they slowly get transformed into harmonics higher and higher and higher, because as you go deaf, you lose the higher register first. So by the end of the piece, it's stratospheric, really. And the idea is that depending on where you might be sitting in the hall, depending on the age that you are, you may or may not hear certain pitches and get that sense of, hopefully a sense of possible loss as well through that, and understand the journey that Beethoven himself went through.
Mm-hmm. And did you find this way of, during the process of composition, was this a piece that flowed, or what was your experience?
Completely the opposite. I think it's the most difficult compositional period that I had. Looking at Beethoven's loss of hearing, it was actually written at a time where my father died. And in that period of grief, I lost the sense of hearing my own music in my head. I didn't realize it was a natural thing for me to hear little pieces of music in my head all the time until it was silence. And it lasted about 8 to 10 weeks. And I just couldn't write. And so this piece felt like I was fighting to get the music out the whole time. So I feel like there's that process going through that sort of sense of loss and that kind of that fighting against it, that sort of railing against losing something that I think is present in it.
Mm. Well, I mean, that's an amazing thing. Thank you for sharing that with us. But this is quite an emotionally, a very emotionally charged piece that is the heart of the essence of things. But if I could talk to you, Hilary, about your piece, First Light, and you chose a number 10, I think, Beethoven's Violin Sonata number 10, is that right? The first movement.
Opus 90, yes.
90. And same question to you, really. I mean, can I ask why you were drawn to that particular piece?
Well, first of all, I was drawn to the project. Mm-hmm. I mean, the idea of being asked to write something for the music clubs of Wales, was just such a warm idea. And then to be asked to write something for Beethoven in Wales. I don't know if you remember the image that went with it, but Beethoven is kind of carved out of Welsh rock and is there. So that was intriguing. I have taught chamber music a lot. So I'm sorry, Rian, but I could not possibly do the Spring Sonata because I remember the E flat becoming D sharp for the rest of my life. So, frankly, the last one, the one that I had never taught, was Opus 90. And then I wondered how I could go about it. And like Rian, I have never done anything in sonata form. I mean, it's like, sonata form. And yet, well, it turns out to be a pretty good form after all.
Not bad at all.
And so I actually have an exposition, which one may choose to repeat or not.
Oh, but do you have masculine and feminine cadences in there? That's the thing.
No, there's no way. I have my limits.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. I'm very glad. Yeah.
But this idea of returning to a kind of an innocence with respect to that sonata form was intriguing and almost playful. I mean, I called it First Light because it's called the cock because of thumpa. And then it was kind of fun to put that in all sorts of places. And I loved being inhibited from going where I usually go, which is into different rhythmic patterns and you know, all the things one normally does as a composer. I figured, wait a minute, you're doing Beethoven in Wales, you'd better obey the command. And in the end, I think the piece works. I'm not sure I'm ready to, okay, I am never going to do another sonata form movement, but this was the opportunity and I really enjoyed it. And I especially loved the idea of doing something for the Welsh music community. That was the guiding principle.
That's absolutely marvellous to hear. What was your experience of working with Mary Hoffman and Richard Ormrod?
Oh, do you know where they live? So, you know, first getting to the house was extraordinary. And me thinking, how did they ever get a piano up to this house? You know, and so on. I've worked with Mary Hoffman. She has a YouTube of another piece of mine called The Cresset Stone, which she actually recorded, videotaped in Brecon Cathedral. She's a terrific performer, and she's wide open to ideas, which is lovely. I mean, Beethoven in Wales could have been pretty dead, but I mean, look what's happened.
I know. Look at the team, guys.
Yeah, it's really terrific, and I can't thank her enough for being willing to go with her ideas, and for T-Care being willing to sponsor it. It's a wonderful. It's a wonderful gift.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you, Hilary. Can I ask the same question to Steph, whose Dream Tides we'll be hearing this evening. What was it like hearing Mary Hoffman and Richard Ormond, record your piece?
Well, it's wonderful. I was just listening to you talking about where they lived. I never actually got to see where they lived because when I was due to go and rehearse with them, I was coming I was coming from Bangor and there were big floods. And every single road between here and where they live was cut off. So I had to give up and phone them and say, well, I might be able to get to you, but it's going to take me 3 hours to get around, such and such, and by then it could be closed. So I didn't actually get to rehearse with them until they came to record my piece, Dream Tides, in Cardiff. So that was lovely to finally get to meet them and to work with them on the piece.
It's because this the CD release, it's been delayed, obviously, by the pandemic, hasn't it?
Yeah,
it was due for release earlier as well. And can you tell me a little bit about your piece? It strikes me just from reading the program note that this is there's an emotive impulse to this, is very emotional. Are you dealing with a sense of loss, Steph?
Yes, I mean, not in the direct sense that Sarah Leanne is talking about, but it was definitely a time of transition in my life where I was kind of uncertain about what the future was going to hold, and it strikes me that that's basically what life is about. But there are certain moments in our lives where that becomes very focused and very, those sort of those big change moments. And the piece was a kind of anchor, but it was more than that. It was a way of me just finding a kind of equilibrium in disequilibrium. So. You'll see in the program notes that I talk about it being around that peculiar liminal space that exists between sleeping and waking. But it was sort of more than that in the sense of, what may be sort of submerged and coming to consciousness at those moments of transition and having to put trust in your next steps and what's going on. So it was both a sort of anchoring, but it was also saying, actually, it's fine. Paradox is fine. Disequilibrium is fine. That's our natural state as human beings. It's just particularly acute for me at this moment. But so there's no sort of overt emotional expression in the piece at all. It's actually very calm. And it's more to do with the structure of the piece, which is essentially very simple, but it's in shifting layers. So the violin and piano constantly sort of slide kind of in these sort of long phrasing, long arcing phrases across, above and below each other, but they do come together at points. So there are these moments where the harmony kind of, drifts into a sort of vertical space as well as being, you have to hear it horizontally. And the phrasing is slightly lopsided as well. So it's never, nothing is symmetrical, quite. Although you think it is.
Lopsided phrases are good, yes? Is that right? Yes, it's brilliant.
And it's nothing to do with Beethoven either. although I do.
You don't think it is, but.
Well, I'm sure there might be something in there. Well, no, probably not.
That's wonderful. Well, it's very exciting that we're going to be hearing this concert tonight, but I wonder, as I have you here on stage, I've been running a women's work in music workshop today. It's running from today and tomorrow in the music department. And there's a lot of attendees attending from outside, or really the UK. So we have a person from Australia, we have attendees from the States and Europe, as well as Taiwan, and of course Wales here and the UK. And we're having a really stimulating time thinking about questions of, where's music, women in music studies in terms of teaching and scholarship and leadership in the classical music world today. And I thought, well, as I have, 5 incredible ladies that are working in classical music today, I wonder whether I could ask you for your perhaps your comments and experience and thoughts about women's position, your position as working women in music today. Deborah, you're director of TCAS Music Centre Wales. It's one of the largest music organisations in Wales. Are there enough women leaders in the classical music industry today, in your view?
No. I think, Wales is a very small nation and we have a very small number of organisations, and we have the first woman director of BBC National Orchestra of Wales in place, and we have more and more women in positions of leadership. But because we are a small sector, there's very slow churn, and there is need for more support of women to have leadership roles. I think it's interesting because we in TCAR are working a lot with individual artists, particularly composers, and we have had for a long time brilliant women composers who come to the fore in Wales. I would still say that we find it very interesting when we put out our opportunities for composers. There are certain sorts of project that will attract more applications from women, and there are certain sorts of project that attract very few women applicants, and that's something that concerns us. There are, an example would be, we did a pathway that Andrew Lewis, who's here today, was lead composer on, and it was around writing for chamber ensemble and electronics. For that pathway, we had many, many fewer women apply than men. And another pathway, in fact, that Sarah ended up being on, which was around working, composers working with learning disabled actors, adults, many more women than men applied. Now, there are some really, this is anecdotal evidence, but there is some trends here that are both interesting and inform some of the work we need to do, some of the positive action we need to take to support women to take the leap in many areas.
Those are extremely interesting findings, and as you say, play into sort of traditional stereotypes, really, and research in this area has proved that that is the case, that we still, to a certain extent, although things are a lot better, we still, quite a lot of us still live in that world, I'm afraid. But, and I wonder whether I could come to Steph first, really, and ask you for your thoughts about really your own experiences of working as a composer today, really, in classical music.
Well, I think in terms of, women, I think it's still pretty tough. I think there are lots and lots of pressures. And, we live in a society that, we're very far from having equal pay, for instance. It's not just in music and the cultural sector. But I think we're very much a society in crisis. Even before the crisis that we can all name that are very immediate and acute, I think that we have a crisis in how we run things. And I think women are particularly vulnerable to a society where our systems of care, for instance, are not equitable or sorted out. So I think, in terms of ideology and sort of baggage, and yes, in my lifetime, things have improved. But I think the fact that I'm sitting here saying things have improved over the last sort of 40 years is pretty pathetic, because, they should have been, it should not be an issue. And it's just not been a social priority. And I think it's really important. The kind of work that TCAR does, it's very important that we make it a priority, that we make the arts accessible to all. And I'm thinking intersections there as well, you know, and it's really important that, you know, it's race, it's you know, gender identity, women, sexuality. It's time we stop putting these things in boxes and that we actually said, if we value the arts, then we have to value people and we have to value women and we have to do something about it if they cannot access education or opportunities or career advancement. And maybe that means changing the culture around it very radically in ways that we simply haven't been willing to grasp.
I agree with a lot that you say, absolutely. And maybe it means that, you know, we have to think about, you know, how to make people's awareness better, I think, also, and think about changing cultures. It's time. It's in fact somewhat overdue on this issue.
Totally.
Hilary, can I ask, you have a different perspective, of course, because you were born in this country, but living over in the States. What would you say are your thoughts on the position of women composers today, really, as compared? I mean, it's, as Steph has said, it's a lot better, really, but what are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, there's the question of women composers. There's just the question of contemporary composers. And so contemporary male composers have great problems. Contemporary women composers have great problems. Composers these days have great problems. We've just been through a 3-year pandemic when we've lost so many of our performers. There's a turnaround in the publication industry. Do you go to a publisher, or like Jennifer Higdon, do you publish your own stuff? Do you refuse to have a publisher? What does it mean to have a CD these days, when in fact most people access music through streaming or YouTube or Spotify or all the other things? I mean, what is the path that we are supposed to be on? Let alone whether we're on it or not. This is not this CD, but I've just completed a CD, and I'm told that no one wants the score because everyone is using an iPad. I mean, orchestras are using iPads, choirs are using iPads. What the performers want is to have PDFs. What does it mean to be a woman composer in a PDF, YouTube, Spotify world, as distinct from the world that I remember from coming into it, which is being a house composer for Oxford University Press in 1989 and handing, can you believe, a pencil manuscript and then having it published and promoted and performed. We're not in that world anymore. The question you asked, I'm sorry, is narrow. The question we need to ask is what will the nature of music production dissemination be in 5, 10 years? And then we can ask, how can women be part of this?
But don't you think we should be asking that now as well? Because, I mean, you know, composers, they use used to write on pen to paper, and some still like doing that, but today it's straight on Sibelius or some other software, and various things. And do you find the internet and those kind of providing a PDF and those kind of publications, self-publishing, is a big thing, and isn't that sort of a liberating thing for composers in some respects?
As long as we're alive. Well, if we're not, then what happens? Is the music publishing limited to the time that the composer can send out stuff from a computer? As an older composer, I hope not. I hope there's more to it.
What are your thoughts about...
I have many.
Sarah Leanne.
I mean, when you talk about music publishers, you look at any large UK music publisher, and there are so few women. There are so few women represented. And of the new music composers represented, they're young men. And often they're also people who have like a dual kind of job. They're a composer, conductor, or composer something else. So it feels like those spaces don't really welcome women into them. I'm self-published. I just thought that's the route that I'm going to go down for various reasons. But looking at other women in the industry, I can't understand why they're not published by larger organisations when actually they should be. And it feels like we're still, my generation, I know like the generations before have fought for us, and they've done so much work, and we are in a better position, my generation now, than the position was 20, 30 years ago. But we're still having to fight.
Yes, indeed. And if recent statistics, if you look at by Donna Women in Music, show that, and this was a survey that was done of 100 leading international orchestras in 27 countries, and they looked at the programmes, what was actually being performed in the concert hall, and found that really it was only about 11.5% of the total number of pieces were by women composers. So that's a very, minute.
And lots of those are short pieces.
Yes.
And you might have a programme that has Beethoven's Symphony in the second half and a 5-minute piece by a woman in the first half. And that ends up having a billing as quarter of the programme, but it's not. It's a very small part of it. Sorry, interrupting there, but yeah.
It's true. Rhiannon, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my first thought was when we were talking about the specific issue of women composers was it took me back to last October when I was at Ludlow as the composer in residence, and I had to run a workshop for young composers. And I was presented with the pieces. There were 5 by boys, not a single one by a woman. And I made a big fuss about it, and we eventually added one woman to the programme. But it goes back to when I was doing the Norton Grove Dictionary of Women Composers. I would have to go out and look for information about women. I remember going to the BMIC, which was the British Music Information Centre, now closed, and looking in the files for stuff about women. There was so little. Women just don't push themselves forward in the way men do. I mean, I can go back to when I was teaching and my students would come in and I'd say, well, what are you doing? And the men would say, I'm a composer. And the women would go, doing this and that and the other. And I think there's still a bit of that. I think it's improved hugely since 50 years ago when I started out. There is so much more women's music. It may not be amongst the big orchestras, but all over the place. And that's what I do. I put my head down and I get pieces played here, there, and everywhere, but only by just writing for people I know. I have a wonderful publisher in T. Cerdd, and I have another publisher, which is Stainer and Bell, who only want things that will sell, which isn't a huge amount of my music these days, I have to say. So if you write something that's sort of, very popular, then your chances of getting published are much higher these days. Publishers are really interested in the bottom line, which I don't think you could say was the case with Universal Edition and people like Schoenberg and Berg and Faber, they surely didn't sell a great deal in their time, but they were published. Nowadays, that isn't happening. On the issue that Hilary was bringing up about the state of classical music these days, well, it's very sad in all ways, starting with music education in schools, which is, I think, just disappearing, really. And it's, again, the bottom line. You know, we have a festival in Machynlleth where my husband and I live, and it's just happened, and we had a week of performances. The first 2 or 3 days were all of local Welsh music, male voice choirs, brass bands, local singers, packed out. Second half, classical music, half full. And so what's going to happen next year? Well, we'll wait and see, but I do think the weight of the festival is going to change. Not that Welsh music doesn't have a wonderful place in this country, but I also want classical music to be a part of it. And I think classical music is in dire straits right now. So that's...
Certainly, it does feel in many respects that music is experiencing some kind of crisis in this country, particularly in terms of education and various others. So, you know, it's important that we support music in all its shapes and forms. We go to those concerts and really just, you know, be of immense support to everybody. It's wonderful. Thank you very much for joining me here on the stage, but I think our time is up. So I'd like to thank Rhian Samuel, Sarah Leanne Lewis, Hilary Tan, Steph Power and Deborah Keyser for joining me for this very exciting concert. Very much looking forward to your pieces, to hearing your pieces. And please, could we just thank the composers and Deborah for sharing their thoughts with us. Thank you.
I'm going to give an unsolicited plug that after the, or indeed before, but you might want to hear the pieces first. After the concert, there will be CDs on sale, and even if you only like one of them, it will be well worth your £10, which is a discounted price. Thank you, Rhian.
And can I just add, there'll be just a short break now for those of you tuning in online, and then the stage is going to be prepared for the performance, which will start at 7:30. Okay, thank you.
it seems there's little point in introducing the pieces since you've already heard all about them from the composers. So all I'm going to say is that after the three, as it were, Beethoven pieces, the three first pieces, we're going to take a very short break because we feel that 5 pieces right on top of each other doesn't do any benefit to them or to us. We hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. second half, we have two pieces that carry us to different worlds. One, the first to the world of dreams, and the second one, unfortunately, Eleanor wasn't here to talk about her piece, but she said that she imagined it taking her to a different planet, as though you were waking up in a completely new world.